Okay, I'm sure we will be joined by others, but welcome everyone to our LOTI Show and Tell. Today we are joined by colleagues from Hackney, specifically Zoe, Claudia, Josh and Pauline. They will be talking about their link worker model for preventing residents from reaching crisis. So I will hand over to Zoe.
Thank you. Hi everyone. Are you able to share the slides? Brilliant.
Yes, no problem.
Sorry, I always struggle with Teams. Thanks everyone for coming. There's 4 of us here from Hackney today, and we're going to talk to you a little bit about some work which LOTI very generously funded about a year ago. And how things have moved on since then. It's actually been really nice to sort of stop and reflect on how things have progressed over the year. And I think what we've been thinking about specifically as we've been writing this up is how do we go from pilot to service? So we're really lucky to have the funding for this pilot and get things going. And the question, as I'm sure you all experienced in, is how do you go from trying something new to actually changing business as usual? So we're going to talk for about half an hour and then we will have time for questions, and we're really interested, like looking at the job titles of people here, we're really interested in your advice and feedback as well as questions. So please feel free to put things in the chat as we go, or wait for the end to come off mute and ask those. We also have regular show and tells that we do internally for this work, which external people are more than welcome to come to. So I think Polly will share afterwards the details of those. Please let us know if you or colleagues want to keep in touch. Next slide, we are just going to cover today really quickly, like our journey to date, where this has come from, what it is, a few reflections on what's working and what's hard, and then sort of a very sort of honest and frank sort of sharing of what we're thinking about in terms of how we scale at the moment, and really interested, as I say, for advice on that. So I'm going to take you back to 2 years ago, to where we started with all this, which was the beginning of lockdown. On the next slide. Yeah, we obviously, everyone knows Hackney had lots and lots of challenges in the borough, even before the pandemic started. So 1/3 of our households live in poverty, and that includes 48% of children in our borough live in poverty. And then literally overnight on March the 23rd, all of our services shut down. So on the next slide, that meant that we were forced to do things differently immediately. And that meant that, you know, as I'm sure lots of people on here worked on in your boroughs, like food was the most pressing issue there. So that was people who couldn't necessarily afford food before the pandemic, now also couldn't access it. So on the next slide, what did that mean we do? Basically, in hindsight, we set up an online supermarket in 6 weeks. So we started delivering, you know, by the second week of lockdown, we'd done 500 food parcel deliveries. And over those first 4 months, we did 22,000 to 9,000 households. And all of that, it's worth saying, well, the actual supermarkets didn't innovate their models at all. How did that all happen? Next slide. That was delivered through a new helpline. Again, I'm sure everyone's boroughs here did something similar. That was staffed by 12 volunteers, including Pauline, who's here on the line today, who said, yes, I'll take on the task of trying something new. You know, they were dealing with about 250 calls a day at the peak. And I think what's really important for this story is like residents didn't just tell us about like the food that they needed, like because we were talking to people in a new way. It wasn't a service with a name and eligibility criteria and an application form. It was just an open we actually called it I Need Help, because that was the name of that we gave to the form on the first morning of lockdown. So because people were just able to say to us, I need help, not I understand the service that you deliver and how I need to apply for it, they were just telling us about this completely wide range of challenges they were facing. And a case in point was resident M on the next slide. So this was an older man, 80-year-old, lives alone, diabetic. We began delivering food to him. And then a couple of months into this, a volunteer noticed a really serious deterioration in his well-being, and was saying he had 11 pounds to his name. He'd been unable to cook or keep things clean. So we were doing morning stand-ups with our customer services team, and we said, does anyone remember speaking to this guy? And Pauline and others said, actually, yeah, he calls a few times a day and he always seems very confused and frustrated by things. Meanwhile, alongside the food, we'd set up a multidisciplinary team, which was a really, really informal half an hour once a week chat with local health, voluntary sector housing, council partners, who were just really, really quickly sharing data and information and services to our most vulnerable residents. So without having to go through loads of long-winded work to try and get into NHS health systems, we could just find out from that call with the mental health teams a bit about his history, but it was really clear to everyone that there had been a massive deterioration. So the adult social care people on the call said, we'll go out and do a visit tomorrow. They did that. They found signs of a recent stroke that had obviously gone unpresented in health settings. So the care plan was put in place, and what was really nice about this one, I think, is that the public health and adult social care colleagues on the MDT were able to then share advice back to the call handlers and say, this is what impact this stroke will have had, this is why he behaves like this is the best thing to do in terms of how to support him and others if they're confused or forgetful. And I think what was interesting about this case, and many, many others like it, was that we didn't do anything differently than before. The services that were in place weren't different to those before the pandemic, but it was just like the wheels had been greased a bit, like things were just moving quicker. More staff found it much easier to talk to other staff and other services quickly and with agility and flexibility. And we were a change support team. That's our function within the council, and we thought it was really important for us that we said we can't just go back to the way things were once this lockdown's over. Like, what are all the really, really excellent ways of working that have happened here that we should be holding on to and establishing as the new normal? So that was the sort of starting point where we came at this from, and I'm going to hand over to Claudia to show how we link to LOTI.
Thanks. Next slide, please. Hi, everyone. I'm Claudia. I'm a service designer in the change support team, and I help set up and run the link work team. Thank you, Polly. Next slide, please. So where we got to this time last year, so coming out of all that learning that Zoe was talking about, and really wanting to make sure that we took hold of that and didn't lose it and just slip back into the way we were working before, both in terms of how we were speaking to residents, but also how closely we were working with the voluntary sector, and recognising that sometimes the voluntary sector are in a better place than we were to provide support. So thinking about the support that general frontline services might need. And we were really lucky last year to get some funding from LOTI and support from LOTI and Genta in particular, and to join up with Newham Council, who are also looking at preventative ways of supporting people. And what we did was look at 4 different ways that we might be able to focus on supporting frontline staff, to then go out and be proactive and reach out to people and give them the holistic support they needed. So Newham were focusing on peer-led frontline training, so led by different voluntary sector services or council services, and we were looking at the development of peer support sessions, so trialling how those would work, looking at developing our Better Conversations tool, which began life as that I Need Help form and then has become a referral tool, which any frontline practitioner can use in Hackney. And then the final thing was the beginnings of link work. So we piloted last summer a very small link work team looking at taking in referrals from the voluntary sector, but also looking at how we could start being proactive. Next slide, please. So that was all sort of the beginning to middle of last year, and that has led to a much bigger general approach we're trying to build within Hackney, which we're calling Here to Help. And this is very much focused on, like Zoe was saying earlier, focusing on people's needs and not assuming that people are going to know what services they need or what services we provide in the council. So the first part of that is about intervening early, and that's the link work side of things. So reaching out to people that we think might need support but who aren't reaching out to us, and getting them to that support quicker. So trying to avoid crisis happening later on. The second part of this is really thinking about those elements we were exploring through the LOTI work with Newham, which is developing skills and resources across the council. So creating really meaningful career development opportunities, sharing tools like better conversations and training with wider frontline teams, and really investing in peer support side of things as well. So Link Work, for example, has peer support at the end of every day, where it's just the link workers, and there they can learn from each other's experiences, but also, you know, debrief if they've had a difficult day. And especially after the COVID response, we knew how difficult some of that work could be, and a lot of really traumatizing experiences that our residents were having then being put onto our staff. And then the third part of it is redesigning services. So as we're looking to support frontline staff, also looking at how we can embed this Here to Help approach within different services outside of link work across the council, in statutory services as well, and helping people to adopt a more preventative and proactive approach. Next slide, please. So when we were designing link work, we were mainly looking at two barriers to early intervention. So one was responding better to people who are trying but failing to access services. So we came across people who may have had a referral to a service maybe 4 months earlier, but had been blocked for whatever reason. And then also people who, like I said earlier, just weren't reaching out to us, maybe don't have that trust in the council or that awareness of the services the council can provide. So using our data to actually reach out and identify people who don't ask for help. Next slide, please. And link work, to sort of summarize it very simply, what we want to do is move from this set of relationships we have and dynamics we have at the moment, where we kind of require residents to navigate this very complex system themselves and advocate for themselves. And if someone is particularly vulnerable or struggles a lot, especially with digital, or perhaps they're not very well, that can be really, really difficult. And to keep on pushing and pushing can be really demoralizing as well. And we also know it can be difficult for the voluntary sector to navigate council services, and sometimes they're advocating for someone but they're getting stuck themselves. We've taken about 62 referrals from internal council services and the voluntary sector and the housing and health partners. So we really wanted to move from this spaghetti chaos to, next slide, to this, where the link worker is supporting people and doing that navigation for them. We've reached out to about more than 300 people through 5 different outbound campaigns that Josh is going to talk about later on. Next slide. So Josh, over to you.
Thanks, Claudia. Later on is now. Hi everyone, I'm Josh Naisbitt. I'm a project manager in the change support team. So as Claudia was saying, a big part of this is not just accepting that people will come to us for help, but actually switching that assumption and saying that we should be stepping into people's lives alongside them to help them. And we kind of like to think about it as a triangle of 3 sections, with at the bottom the majority of Hackney's population being kind of in control, and most of what they need they can access through communication, and they can get the help they need themselves. And then at the top, a small section of people in crisis, and kind of our reflection is that actually our system's pretty good at supporting people with crisis. If someone has a heart attack, A&E responds effectively. Social workers are well trained to do what they need to do at crisis point. And we're really interested in that kind of section in the middle, which we maybe might call struggling. And that's a section of the population that if they don't get the right help, there is a risk that they step into that crisis point. And what we really want to do is think about who they are, what data do we hold that suggests they are struggling, and how can we first and foremost prevent them going into that crisis point, but also help them step back down into that kind of in control where they're able to help themselves. So these are the 5 campaigns that we've run in that kind of middle section, which across the piece have reached out to 300 plus residents, and those being the first of which around the European Union Settled Status Scheme. So in September of last year, DWP reached out to us to say that 170 of our residents would soon be subject to suspension of benefits following Brexit, and they were requesting DWP that we suspend housing benefit for this group and direct them to the Home Office to make their EUSS application. Instead of doing that, we took the time to proactively contact this group, have face-to-face conversations, have phone conversations, and on an individual basis, take the time to understand their context and assist them with their application where necessary. And this resulted in 45k per month across 32 residents being kind of kept in their pocket. Another campaign that we ran was around over 70s who lived alone and hadn't booked a repair in more than 2 years, and particularly in the context of that COVID period being those 2 years, this was a real red flag in our data set, which told us, okay, maybe these people may be struggling, maybe they may need some support. And through proactively calling these people, we identified that 72 of these individuals would need support. We provided them with kind of holistic rapid support, thinking about repairs they needed, thinking about investing in their homes, thinking about their wider health and well-being. Another campaign we ran was around discretionary housing payments, and we worked closely with our discretionary housing payment team to rethink about how we could use the money that was allocated to us to get it into the pockets of those most in need, and what data did we hold that could indicate that with the highest benefit shortfalls, so that gap between their housing benefit and their rental. And there was some really worrying figures in Hackney in terms of like some residents with £300+ per week shortfall between their benefits and their rent. And so through this scheme, we sent text out, follow-up calls, and ended up paying out £560,000 in just under 6 weeks, as well as thinking about how we could support those residents more holistically, so it wasn't just a one-off payment and we'll see you in 12 months for the same again. Another proactive campaign that is currently underway is around hoarding, and particularly an early intervention approach to hoarding. And this again is where we feel there's a slight gap in the crisis service offer, and those people that just exist kind of on the edge of care and have those indicators of kind of less severe hoarding disorder, and there's no real offer for them at the moment. And we know that if that severity increases, hoarding cases cost a massive amount to our system, kind of like 15 to 20k as an average in that severe end when it reaches self-neglect, and adult social care will step in. So we've got a small amount of funding to develop an offer in that early intervention space for hoarders, and we're going to be working with 20 residents in partnership with a local VCS partner to develop an approach for early intervention, but also think about how we can connect those residents into wider holistic support so they can embed sustained change. And then the final campaign, which is a new one, is really exciting, and I think reflects both the success of our other proactive campaigns, but also just the way in which the link workers have been working and the skills and approach that they've been exhibiting, and how well received this has been by partners. In the last kind of month or so, adult social care have reached out to us for link workers to lead the targeted support for Ukrainian guests that have come to Hackney through the Homes for Ukraine scheme, and that's 149 hosts and 267 guests. And our focus here is first and foremost, what do you need now, but also creating a structure around both the hosts and guests, so as when things do, or if things do start to go wrong, there's a relationship with the council, there's a trust with the council We hope they'll feel comfortable reaching out to us. We hope we're close enough to recognise any red flags, and we won't lead to kind of placement breakdown and potential homelessness for Ukrainian guests. So those are 5 of the proactive outbound campaigns that we've run. And if I could have the next slide, please, Polly. Thanks. So how has this been working? And if we could just go to the next slide, I think there's several ways we've been thinking about this, and it felt kind of like in the last few months, now's been the time to really reflect on how we measure value. And for a while we were doing things, and anecdotally our case studies were telling us that these were delivering value for residents, but it felt like a moment to really reflect and ensure that we were embedding how we measure value into the growth of whatever this thing is. So we've done that, and we've thought about how we do that in several ways. The big chunk of the pie is those anecdotal stories. It is, what is the direct impact for residents? What are the outcomes for residents? It is thinking about how staff skills are developed and thinking about where link workers are at the end of the secondment and the skills that they've gained and how they can take that back into the wider system. We've spent time talking to, doing user research with residents who were previously supported, to think about how it's worked for them, to think about what we're doing well and what we need to do more of, and to think about how the work we're doing is or isn't changing the perception of the council. And we're also thinking about kind of how we improve equalities outcomes, and that's something that we're really excited about in terms of proactive campaigns. And I think sometimes we have this assumption within the local authority that by creating lots of barriers, referral forms, assessment processes, we will get the right people, those that need help the most, because only those that need help the most will come through these processes. We don't always think that's right, and actually think we improve our qualities outcomes by using our data to step into people's lives, to those who may not ordinarily reach out to us. So that's the big chunk of the pie. But there's a smaller part of the pie that we think is important, is something we've really started to grapple with in the last couple of months. And that's how we think about the return on investment of our work. That crucial question, are we saving the council and our communities more money than we're spending? And on the next slide, please, Polly. So this is kind of where we're at in terms of return on investment. And of course, that cost per resident today doesn't show a return on investment, but it feels to us pretty low. And it feels to us that because that 642 is so focused on staff costs, there's no massive overheads in there, there's no massive governance structures. When we think about some of the outcomes we're helping to prevent, and as we've started to cost these on a Hackney basis, we feel that we are delivering value in that context of potential big costs when crisis points are reached. And we're really working with colleagues to think about how we develop a more nuanced understanding of some of those crisis points, and also think about how we're showing our mitigation of reaching them. And the kind of return on investment is certainly something that we're still thinking about, and we'll talk about it a little bit more later in terms of what's the kind of effort versus reward of developing a more nuanced ROI measure. So I'm now going to hand over to Pauline, who is one of our brilliant link workers. And when I've gone from numbers, she's going to go to the stuff that we think really talks to value, and that's the kind of experience and outcomes for residents. So over to you, Pauline.
Thank you, Josh. Good morning, everyone. My name's Pauline, and I'm a customer service officer working usually based in the Hackney Service Centre. I'm currently on secondment with the link work team, and in my weeks of joining the link work team, the work I've been able to do working one-to-one with residents, for me has personally been invaluable, and also a very good, I'd say, template in how customer service what customer service might look like in the future in some form. So if I've got one case study, one of the case studies I had was a resident, Mary. She hadn't been in contact with the council for a couple of years, and she had a number of repairs and OT issues that she needed dealing with. And I suppose she needed to speak to someone. It was before the pandemic, she wasn't getting anywhere. And sort of after the pandemic, she just was at her wit's end and didn't bother. So as part of my link work, I contacted her and spoke with her to find out exactly what was going on with her. And her frustration, her just no drive to try and contact the council. She just sat in her situation with nowhere to turn to. So I took on her situation, which was she had a lot of damp and cracks in her property. She had an assessment with our OT team, and she'd had some work done, and the rail that she needed to go up and down her stairs, that wasn't installed, and she struggled to, you know, get that work done. So I stepped in with her, spoke to her housing manager. The housing manager put me in touch with the repairs team, and we worked out how we were going to try and get this work completed for my resident. The good thing about it with this was I was her sole point of contact. She didn't have to call the repair. She didn't have to call her housing manager, because I was that bridge that held her up. So with all she needed to do was to receive an update from me, regular calls giving her an update on what I had gone away and found out. So in the background, I was there trying to speak to this one, trying to get this work done. At one point, the repairs team said, all right, we'll do one room. And because of the delays and everything, but the rest of it will need to be done by someone else. And I said, well, I wrote back to them, I said, so if you do one room, who is going to be responsible for getting the other rooms done? So then that took the situation back to repairs. But for me, the main thing for me was working, getting all these things done for her, but making sure taking away all the stress and distress from her, and just bringing her updates of what we were doing, how, you know, never mind what was happening in the background. It was how we were working for her. And, you know, for someone who hadn't been in contact with the council for over 2 years, you know, the initial conversations, yeah, we had it, you know, we had to work to build up some form of trust, because she didn't know me. She'd been speaking to so many people. So building up that trust until it wasn't just about the repair issues anymore. It was about other things that was going on in her life. And for me, as a link worker, that is quite useful, because it's almost like the unspoken request that I hear, and I can say, all right, you know, here's a number, speak to this person, or did you know there's this organization who might be able to help you with a situation? So as well as supporting the residents on to you know, resolve ongoing issues, is also supporting them with other things that they might not even understand, that, you know, we could tell them something to help them get help for an issue they may have. And on my next slide, is that me done?
Yeah, thank you, Pauline. Pauline,
Yeah.
could we go to the next slide? Thank you. Thanks, Pauline. Yeah, I think Pauline really clearly showed how the some of those really simple things like chasing something up, following something up, makes such a big impact. And what we've done is go back to residents who've been supported by Linkwork and ask them about for their feedback on the service, but also how they feel about the council in general. And I spoke to someone, they've been anonymised, but called Andrew, who's 73, who had been contacted by the team through the repairs outbound campaign. And initially, when asked about his views on the council, he said the council's inefficient, corrupt in some areas, ineffective, misleading, incapable, offensive. Housing management people know nothing about housing and fire regulations. A lot of older people are terrified in those situations. So they had a lot of mistrust of the council. There was a lot of negativity, and starting from a very negative point. And it was Dion in the Linkwork team who first called them. So initially, you know, with this kind of language in some places in the council, you might give them a red flag, or, you know, mark them as a cautionary contact and be careful about speaking to them. Next slide, please, Polly. But what Dion instead did was just really lean into what they were trying to say, and what Andrew wanted was to be heard and to be listened, and Dion gave him that ear to listen to. And his response about Dion was incredible. He said, Dion has changed things amazingly so. He's been telling his neighbours about the service, and he had this feeling that someone's come in and said that things have got to be changed, and he could really feel like there was a shift in the council in the way that we're approaching things, and called it a breath of fresh air, and hoped it's a permanent thing. Next slide, please. And when I asked him to describe what was different about the support he received, he said, lovely Dion helped. She's been very helpful, and surprisingly so. She asked for a list of outstanding things. I gave her a list of things. And essentially what Dion did was just ask him what he needed, paid real attention to what he needed, listened to him, got those things done, set expectations, and then met those expectations. And also just provided a really human and friendly voice and face of the council. So he said at the end, she was very good to talk to, genuinely open and takes notes and insists on reading everything back to make sure she got things right. These are really, really small details, but quite often, especially if someone's being quite negative initially, our reaction can be to push back and to say, oh, well, we don't really want to engage with them too much. But you can see how these small things and just getting stuff done and doing that, going just a step further and being really human and seeing someone who actually needs help and looking through just the negativity, how much of a difference that made to changing this person's perspective on the whole council. Next slide, please. Thank you. So I just want to ask Pauline a couple of questions about how you found this work. How's it been going in general for you and your colleagues, Pauline?
For me, I found it really, really useful, extremely useful. For me, coming from the role of a customer service officer, where you having to just deal with an inquiry and move on to the next one. It is so rewarding, I feel, being able to have a resident call in or have a case and being able to go on the journey with them from beginning to end, you know, being that person, being that bridge to support them, so they never have to repeat their situation more than once. And this is usually, as a customer service officer, you find where residents call in about one thing, but there is no consistency and continue, you know, you're not able to continue with them. So you deal with them here and it's done. They might not have, you've not been able to resolve the issue because of the nature of customer services. And when they call back again for anything, it's starting the whole thing again. And so you understand why people are frustrated. So that's one thing I love about Linkwork. The other thing I love is being able, at the end of the day, to do our peer work together, because we're learning all the time from each other. We're sharing knowledge. I use a lot of the knowledge I get from some of the things I have learned through Linkwork. I send messages to my team to say, hi guys, this is, you know, you can use this, or here's some useful information. But we're able to share knowledge, deal with each other, look at each other's cases and say, right, I'm struggling with this. Do you know, how could I, you know, and we're able to come up with ideas to support residents to resolve issues for them. Whereas that's so much better than saying, oh, nothing to do with me, I'll just transfer you. Nothing to do, I'll just transfer you. So to me, the holistic approach that's used with Linkwork to really support a resident from start to end, I absolutely love.
Thanks, Pauline. And in terms of the training and support and just the work in general, what impact has that had on your professional development, do you think?
Well, for me, I think it's allowed, I feel empowered. I feel I'm supported. So I never think, oh, I might say the wrong thing or I'm doing the wrong thing, because I'm always supported. And I feel you guys have empowered me to be the best version of myself to support residents. And that is, so it doesn't inhibit me from being my true authentic self and wanting to find out and go the extra mile for a resident, because I know that I'll be supported by you guys should, you know, if I need anything or if should anything happen. So that's also very reassuring, knowing that I've got the support and the training, never left to just figure it out myself. You know, you do figure things out as you go along, but in terms of information that I need from you guys, you're always there to support me. So thank you.
Thanks, Pauline. And I think also, just to add to that, a huge part of it is the support the team gives each other. We have 3 people in each Linkwork team on a secondment basis, and it's very much a team approach to supporting each other and making decisions, and you will provide a huge amount of that support. Thank you. Polly, could we go to the next slide, please? I think I'm handing over to Josh.
Thanks, Claudia. I'm going to whiz through some reflections, good and bad, really quickly because we want to get to questions. So, Polly, if I could have the next slide, please. So what's working well, and I think really what's working well, the crux of it is what Pauline's just described there. We're enjoying it, the team are enjoying it. That quote from, I think it was Mo, that believe it or not, people are closing their laptops with smiles on the face at the end of the day. And that in doing so, they're actually solving residents' problems, and those are totally codependent things, that staff are feeling empowered to actually solve a resident's problem rather than just referring on. That's better for the resident, that's more enjoyable and more motivating for us. And the stuff that Pauline and team are doing is, with all due respect, not rocket science at all. Pauline is an incredibly skilled relational worker, as are all the link workers, but they're doing things that we would do with our family. They've been given the space to have those really high quality conversations and are flourishing when doing so. The starting point is always just genuinely listening, hearing what a good life would look like in the eyes of that resident, taking time to establish trust, and only then thinking about the action that we might take to get there. And this way of working is being underpinned by some pretty soft touch stuff that we put in place. Our core competencies model, which is outlined how we work, our kind of practice model, if you like, and then also has created space to reflect on not just what we're doing, but why it's been effective. And then having really kind of lightweight, rapid, low cost structures that allow us to flex to different problems rather than creating a cumbersome structured thing, supported by IT, similarly low cost, adapted from other things, kind of minimum viable to do the job. And we think this is working well because we're getting the right referrals. Partners are really recognizing the value of our work. There's always this fear when you start a new thing that you're going to get floods of referrals, totally inappropriately. We haven't found that's been the case. We've really been open about our journey, and we think this has helped us get the right referrals. And when we don't get the right referrals, we don't just push them back. We go and speak to the referrer, and we think about what help we can give in this space, even if it's not right for us to hold it fully. And then in terms of some of the challenges, On the next slide, please, Polly. We think we've really, we need to be careful here. We think we're doing well with the connecting model. That kind of a referral comes in, a preventative call goes out, we sit alongside the resident and we connect them to the service that's right for us. But we're absolutely aware that this is limited in fully solving a resident's actual problem. We know how the system works, we know how services operate, often with statutory parameters, and we've been limited in link work in fully being able to sit alongside the resident for the entirety of their journey, end to end, and solve the resident's problem. We're slightly wary that we're just adding a point of referral into the system and pushing residents towards these big services that already exist that may or may not be right for them, rather than holding residents and pulling expertise in alongside them. And we really know that that kind of pushing residents to services can really undermine the strength-based, asset-based approach that is really integral to our way of working. It really runs the risk of making them dependent on these big services that they may or may not actually need. And we know kind of link workers always start with what our vision is for this, asking that question, what would a good life look like for you? And we've started to reflect on whether that connection role will ever truly be able to deliver that, and whether these services we're pushing out to are actually in the right place to deliver that for the resident. And as we kind of feel we're on the precipice of potentially scaling this up, these are some of the challenges we're kind of really grappling with in terms of where we would like to be in a year's time. And Zoe talked briefly about those kind of two options for where we think we might be.
Thanks, Josh. So yeah, just to quickly round this off, and then I can see some questions in the chat that we'll come to. How do we scale? So we're a year into this, and as you can see, you know, we're pretty small at the moment. They're really are thinking about this on the next slide. Was really prompted by a really useful evaluation from UCL, which LOTI helped fund in the original grant that we received last year. So I think this sentence from the report really summed it up, which is that even when we have the most skilled, educated, engaged, connected, empathetic service workers like doing the work, the barrier is the structure of the rest of the organisation. And as Josh has just said, that is a challenge. So some residents, this type of problem we can solve through this connecting work, but some have much more significant problems, and there's what we struggle with. So there are two options on the next slide for how we're thinking about this. Teams is telling me my connection's gone. Is that right?
We can still hear you.
Great. It's just trolling me. So I think there's two issues, and this is very early days that we're thinking about these things. So one option is that we continue to focus on this connecting role. So we keep hiring and developing customer services staff. And I think, Rob, there was a question in the chat about this. So at the moment we have teams of 3 customer service agents from our call centre at a time who come on as a secondment with us for 10 or 16 weeks. And they're supported by the 3 of us and one of the customer services managers on rotation. There's one option, which is that we continue to do this and we continue to focus on this really specific role, which is unblocking access to services. And then our change and transformation team, which is the other part of the service that I run, looks at where there are redesign projects and goes and does those separately. And I think that's a sort of cheap and simple and relatively easy model for stakeholders to imagine, but we might find that our impact's limited. On the other hand, we could expand a little bit into service delivery, and we're really looking here, if there are colleagues from Barking and Dagenham on the call, at the model from Community Solutions. What would it look like to bring in more and more services into a core here to help team and deliver more in-house, if you like, rather than pushing out, and we'd have to think about how we did that without, again, adding further complexity into the system. Yeah, so there are a couple of the questions that we're thinking about at the moment. I can see lots of questions in the chat. So I'm going to stop. We will definitely send round. We're probably not going to cover all of these in 15 minutes. So what I will do is copy them all out, and as we send the slides around, we'll put some things like the budget and costs in some notes to follow. So there's one question here about so there's a couple, one from Pauline and one from Natasha, about the sort of co-design elements and how we worked with either community partners or residents to help develop this. So it has been developed on a sort of co-production model with a little bit with residents, but I think it's fair to say, Claudia, we worked more with voluntary sector partners than residents directly in the creation, but we've done a lot of, sorry, I was going to say I could pick up on that a bit more. So before we started the LOTI work with Newham, we did a big set of research with residents about how they generally found support from the council. I can't remember exactly the number of people we spoke to, but we kind of amassed that, and that fed into the development of this. It wasn't co-production with residents, it was very much co-production with frontline staff, because it had stemmed out of the issues we'd heard from voluntary sector around the barriers they were facing. So the first pilot we did was mostly focused on referrals from the voluntary sector, and it was the model was developed in a kind of series of co-design workshops with different people from different small charities and council teams in Hackney. We want to involve feedback from residents a lot more to help shape the service in future. So the general feedback we're getting and reaching out to people for now, we're going to do on a regular basis to build that in and make sure we're providing a really good service, essentially. Also, just on number 2, sorry, Zoe. Sorry, I just wanted to follow up on that and on Pauline's question about those community groups. So they have been really heavily involved in the co-production from the start, particularly as we were helping people to move out of shielding at the end of the lockdowns. And I think one thing that we're really interested in exploring is obviously the council does lots of grant funding to community groups, and one issue that we're thinking about is potentially, rather than cash, like, can we second staff or people working with those community groups into the link work roles in the council? So this might be a way of supporting those groups by taking some of their core costs of their salary costs off their books for 3 months or 6 months, but also giving them that real experience and understanding and relationships within the council that will hopefully help the work that they do. So that's one of there's lots more we can think about there, but that's, I think, the next thing that we're going to try and see if that's attractive to people. I guess the other thing is just helping those groups unblock things. They put a huge amount of time into their cases, and getting constant knockbacks from the council is incredibly frustrating. So giving them the time and space to actually do the advocacy within the council, I think, is really important. And then finally, we've created a couple of digital tools that help deliver all of this, and we've made that accessible to all of our voluntary sector partners as well. So I think we've got about 400 staff across Hackney, outside of the council as well as within, who are using this tool, which helps you to find services and make referrals easily. So we wanted to make sure that anything we were building for the team, we were sharing across the borough as well.
Yeah, just wanted to pick up on the second question about other models, similar models. So like Zoe mentioned earlier, the Connecting Communities model is something we're looking at, but also initially from a support point of view, the Bertzorg model from the Netherlands, which is a at-home care support. And the inspiration we take from that is their onion model, where you've got the person in the middle who's needing support. You've got the Bertzorg nurses and carers who support them and work with them in a really strengths-focused way to understand what their goals are. And those carers will be much more highly qualified than the carers you might find in the UK, for example, who are paid extremely low wages and often on 0 hours contracts. And then they're supported on the outside by coaches. So they're very much self-managed, not having a kind of line management structure, really getting rid of hierarchy. And we've tried to take that on board with link work and try to like Pauline was saying earlier, tried to empower the team to make decisions and kind of guide the direction of the team. And then we can bring in coaching and support where needed, but really trying to step back from this top-down model, which we don't think empowers people to be curious and take the initiative and work in the way that Pauline was describing earlier. And just on that third one as well, and I think lower down someone's asked too about the team size. So the secondment model at the moment is we get 3 people from customer services to do the secondment for about 4 months. At the moment with Homes for Ukraine, we've got 2 teams working at the same time. So one team's just focused on the Homes for Ukraine support. And then we're also looking at getting people from other teams to join that secondment. So we're building more of a multidisciplinary team. And then, like we were saying earlier, we're now thinking about what is the future of this. Is it a permanent team? Who's involved in it? Where does it sit? That kind of thing.
I think we'll come on to, there's a question about, so there's a couple about digital tool development and notorious data protection, which the short answer is a lot of blood and sweat and tears, but we can definitely share some of the show and tells we did for those projects, particularly on the digital tool, about how we moved these from COVID response tools to being a bit more flexible. The data protection, data sharing problems, I think our big learning is we can spend a lot of time sitting trying to make technology speak to each other and get big service level agreements sorted in place, or we can go on a case by case basis because consent is not the only basis for sharing data. We have legitimate public interest and safeguarding are bases for sharing data. And when we take it on a case-by-case basis and say, we've got this person, we think he's had a stroke, please can you in mental health check and see if there's any history, it's much easier to just quickly say yes, we can do that, rather than hours and decades cumulatively spent in management meetings talking about these issues. So yeah, we think one person at a time is the easiest way to go on data sharing. I think there's another one on the DHP was an interesting question. So how do we identify those 2,000 residents? We realised that the DHP team spent a long time asking people for lots and lots and lots of evidence about their income and costs, which is information that we have if we process their benefits. So if we process their housing benefit, we know most of those things. They are our tenants, so we know what their rent is. We know what their arrears are. We know everything that they needed to apply for housing benefit in the first place. So what we did was, rather than go out to people and ask them to tell us all of that, which is not the way to access people who are in crisis or most at risk of homelessness, instead we used all of that from Academy and created a really simple list that said, here's someone who's got a shortfall of over £400 a week. Actually, we think that's probably an error. We found it was an error. We got their housing benefit sorted. Then, as Josh said, the next 10 people are over £300 a week. There've been some change in certs, which caused that. Not only did we pay out the DHP, but we got them onto the right benefits sanctions. So it was literally just using the data that we already had. And I think there's a huge learning from that DHP work for our other benefits teams and discretionary funds of all types, so we don't have to ask people to tell us information that they know that we know. And if we go back to the question of trust in the council, it's clearly, when I engage with my council, it's comfortably the most annoying thing that I do is tell them my postcode every single time. Yeah, one about from Barking and Dagenham here at the end. Yes, we basically are trying to mimic community solutions in everything we do. We're actually going to Barking and Dagenham next week to see things in person. So we are big fans of what they do. Definitely.
Also, just on sharing our digital tools, they need logins, but we can share screenshots and information about them to show you how they work.
Are there any questions we've missed, or did anyone have any further? We can definitely share a bit of the overall costs and the number of residents we've supported.
We can do that now. Yeah, so it's about, and this was as of about 2 months ago, about 54k in staff costs for about 85 residents, and that's residents that had pretty intensive proper support work rather than we just made a call to them and they didn't need help. So that's where the 642 per head comes from.
Revenue question's a good one. We are begging, borrowing, stealing at the moment from around different bits of the council. We certainly don't have anything remotely looking like long-term funding, but we're going a year at a time at the moment. I'm sure is familiar to lots of people here, but yeah, one of the big questions we're looking at is how do we get, like, is this about core costs from different services? Do we go external for money? Do we do this on a business case, investor save basis? Yeah, lots of questions, but no, we don't have any long-term funding agreed. If anyone's got any, I'd love to see it. It would be interesting to hear how Barking and Dagenham made the jump to the full size of community solutions. So the change team, just looking at Martha's question here, the change team, there's 4 of us, and I guess between us there's probably been about 2.5 FTE per year. As the sort of overheads on the design and development of this. And we're obviously happy to share all of our show and tells and resources and toolkits that have come out of this. One of the things on LOTI's website is a toolkit that we released at the beginning of the pilot, which probably needs a fair bit of updating now, but that shows a lot of how the extensive discovery that Claudia mentioned that we did at the start. You know, research guides for resident interviews, a survey we did with about 300 staff. So all of that's public and really happy to share it. Anyone looking? Change team, good question. It's all slightly hazy because we sort of sit in customer services. We're trying to keep it vague. I think the more that we say this is a service that we're in, the more people get expectations about who we are and what we do and when. So we're trying to just sort of float around the borough suspiciously. But yeah, I guess we report into the director of customer and workplace, which covers benefits, housing needs, customer services and ICT. One minute to go. I'm sorry we've rushed through that. Oh, thanks for sharing, Polly.
Okay, well, I guess maybe we'll end it there. I've got all the questions that I'll send to the Hackney team and they can answer in more detail. I think Zoe's agreed that she'll share her contact details. I think some people have more specific and detailed questions to ask. Once again, thank you to the Hackney team, Zoe, Josh, Claudia, Pauline, for sharing your show and tell. I'm sure everyone, I think we've already got a lot of comments in the chat about how brilliant the presentation was and how interesting it is, and looking forward to an updated toolkit on the LOTI page. Yeah, so we'll be sending all the presentation, the video recording, which will be uploaded on YouTube, and the link to the resources after the event. Have a good rest of the day. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Thank you very much. Cheers.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.